Hello there. This is Progressive Plan Inc.'s Quick Tip number 7. And yesterday in a post, I believe I promised I was going to discuss invest versus burn in terms of turnaround spend. And this entire presentation is pretty much going to be based on things that we've discussed, singularity, and I'm just going to try to tie some of those things back to sort of a sort column here. So one of the things we talked about was the 5 phases of a turnaround. So right now I'd like to sort phases 1, 2, 3, and 5 into the investment column. And phase 4, the execution phase, remains in the burn column where it really is never going to move from. Phase 5 might take some people by surprise, but we're going to talk about that when we get to it. I want to sort the master milestone schedule into the investment column and the master execution schedule into the burn column, and there's reasons why I want to do that. We have discussed in past work and past discussions that the vast majority of forensic studies, at least my own forensic studies of failed turnarounds, pretty clearly point to the root of the failure being in the master milestone schedule. And I think I was pretty clear that it's not because the master milestone schedule was flawed, it's because the master milestone schedule wasn't complied to. So compliance to the master milestone schedule is a well identified failure mechanism. Investing to avoid that just plain makes sense. We also talked about how in a modern execution schedule, that's really the cutting edge of the pursuit of excellence. This is where we move a successful turnaround to a good turnaround. This is where once we've achieved good, we can move on to the pursuit of excellence. So let's take a look at some of the phases that I'm putting into the investment column and try to understand. I'm going to start with phase 3 because phase 3 we have good solid statistical data for. So we have statistical data that suggests that detailed planning in general has a return on investment of 100 to 1. So I mean, two things here. Obviously, if you can discuss something in terms of ROI, it's an investment. But even if that's not convincing in itself, if I put $1 into something and get $100 back, that is by definition an investment. Another statistic that I'd like to put out there is repair in the field is generally expected to cost a 12 to 1 ratio on both time and treasure. Both. And both of those things can be best controlled through detailed planning. So let's leave phase 3. I actually think the case for phase 3 being an investment phase has been well made by a lot of other people. Let's go to phase 1. Strategic planning. Why is strategic planning an investment? Well, I'm not going to go through the whole strategic planning thing here. I do want to point out strategic planning is primarily the accountability and responsibility of the strategy team. You see how that works? But let's just talk about the long-range strategic asset maintenance plan. These are assets running in the billions of dollars. You need to have a long-range plan in order to control or avoid unexpected runaway costs. That just makes sense. I liken this to my own home light. If take my furnace, for instance. I live in northern British Columbia up here on the Alaska Highway, and it can get quite cool. So if my furnace fails at 2:30 in the morning one February night, and it's blizzarding outside and it's minus 18 degrees outside, I'm probably going to be able to find someone to come. I don't want to over dramatize this and say my family's going to freeze to death. That's not what's going to happen in the part of the world where I live. However, there's going to be a cost associated with that. On the other hand, if I had an asset maintenance plan for an asset that I can just plain look up, I mean, even your insurance company tells you that at 10 years your furnace is a question. So maybe I did a 5-year maintenance cycle on my furnace. And maybe at 10 years I did blower maintenance and motor maintenance and replaced the computer board and had the heat exchanger inspected. Chances are I'm not going to have that massive cash burn one night in the middle of February. Long-range planning, always an investment. There's no other way to look at it. Skipping it, pure recklessness. Phase 3, the organizational phase. Why would I bring this up? Well, in phase 3, we're going to finalize all our schedules. Schedules are an investment. Our cost control budget is going to be finalized. If you're not going to have a cost control budget, then you're not really trying to control your costs. It's got to be part of the investment. Manpower, machinery, material that procured, mobilized to site. Again, I'll point out, yes, I'm aware that while the operators are shutting the plant down, I could pick up the phone and I could, if I was really good at this, I could probably make all of these things show up on site. At what cost? I'm proposing that the difference between what I will pay doing it in the organizational phase and what someone with another opinion would pay doing it the way I just described, that's my return on investment. Same thing with the contracts, same thing with the organizational chart. I mean, you wouldn't dream of not having an organizational chart for the facility management. So why would anybody enter into a turnaround that way? You're spending, and we've talked about this in the past, you're spending half that facility's budget. It's worthy of at least the same level of attention to detail. There's a couple other things I've added on here, though. With an increase in activity, increases the demand on the administrative control system. So right away, we should start to see, is our administrative support plan, were our administrative training plans adequate? We have an opportunity at this early phase to fix something before we get into the pure burn phase. The other thing that we should consider during our organizational phase is a readiness audit. And I'm just going to be honest with you, I've never met a turnaround team that didn't hate readiness audits. Actually, that's not totally true. The turnaround teams usually don't have that much of a problem with the readiness audits, but the support teams that are expected to support the turnaround team usually have a pretty big issue with readiness audits. That isn't a reason to avoid readiness audits. That's perhaps an opportunity for leadership coaching. Right? Readiness audits have a purpose, and it is not to point fingers at people and say your work is inadequately done. It is to make sure that by the time execution gets here, their work is adequately done. And we've already defined what adequately done looks like, so this shouldn't be as difficult as it tends to be. And let's talk about the closeout phase. I think every turnaround SME out there has noted this, that people don't put anywhere near enough effort into their closeout phase. And I think the places that are missed the most are the opportunities for investment. Opportunity for investment. Update all your work packages with current learnings. We've talked about how the work of a turnaround is, in general, routine, repeated maintenance. So if that work package was flawed this time out, 5 years from now, when you pull it back out and bang the dust off it, it will still be flawed. Unless you invest during the closeout phase and update that work process. To expect that the incoming team 5 or 6 years later will just catch that, you'll put a sticky note on that and they'll just catch that, that's silly. That's never going to happen, and you know that's not what's going to happen. Updating your work packages is an investment in the next outage. Updating every single support plan. If somebody got to the bottom of a reactor and there was a half-day hold up because there was special safe work practices that needed to be followed, that's a failure in your HSE or your responsible care, whichever way you call it, plan. And that should be corrected while the memory is fresh so that it doesn't happen again. It is not a serious error if it's the first time it happens. But if this has happened last time and the time before, maybe it's time to start investing. Updating the pre-training programs that are part of your support plans. Now, every support team that has very particular expectations from the turnaround team and the contractors is accountable for providing training for that interface. Now, the most common place this comes up in a forensics report is coming from the administrative/finance team. People didn't give us our LEMS properly. People didn't report out consistently. It's good to put that in the closing report, and it's good that that goes into the lessons learned report, but it should not be done with a finger-pointing attitude. The flaw, if administrative reporting was not done correctly, it means that the training program provided by the administrative support plan was inadequate. And it is the administrative team's accountability and responsibility to fix that. And doing it during the closing phase while everybody remembers what happened, that's an investment. So, let's recap. In the investment column, I'm proposing to you phases 1, 2, 3, and 5. Most of the money spent in those phases, investment. Master milestone schedule, compliance to the master milestone. I don't care whether you made it yourself, whether you bought it from a reputable provider, how you came by it. If it's not, there's no meaning to it unless you comply with it. Compliance to the master milestone schedule. This is going to define success and failure. So what I'm telling you is whether your turnaround's a success or a failure is mostly tied up in whether you chose to invest in the investment phases. The burn phase, phase 4, master execution schedule. Big changes happening there. You know, I think people are on to P6 is where it has to be, but we've moved past twice a day updating now. We're into the world of dynamic scheduling. We're into the world of zero delay schedule updating. This is what is currently driving turnaround success. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that this has been helpful to people. I'll see you next week.